Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 81 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight I'm joined by the gentleman who decided to do 2 shots of bourbon in honor of Grant's 200th birthday today, Darren Weeks. I'm his Canadian co-host who just did 1 shot, but when you factor in the shitty exchange rate right now, it turns out that would only be about 3/4 of a shot of bourbon. And my name is Mary.
Wow. Okay. That's third time's a charm, Mary. There you go with that. Third time's a charm. Be a better intros a little bit. You know, of course, you're not factoring the height exchange rate. You know, you're 5'2" versus, whatever.
Yeah, so what does that make me? The dollar is like, if I give you $1, you Canadian, like if I give you a loonie, you would hand me back like 75 cents American. That's what it's worth.
What do you call me? Anyway, so what's going on with you? What's happening? What's going on?
Not much. It's been a long time since we recorded. It feels like forever. How are you?
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks. I know. It's been, I was thinking today as I was sitting at work not paying attention to my job, we spent more time between first and second episodes of Appomattox, the entire Appomattox campaign.
I know.
Real.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so
hopefully people aren't Appomattoxed out by this point and still want to listen to the episode. How are you?
True. Yeah. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's late in the week. We got some shenanigans afoot this weekend. We're having a good time this weekend, so we'll have a lot of fun going on.
It'll be fun.
And we've had some shenanigans last weekend too, but now we're back at it. We're back to work, back on the gig. So
we are.
As we talk about part 2 of Appomattox.
Yes, but before we get to that, I believe we have some business to attend to first, our usual. So what are you drinking and out of what mug, Mr. Weeks?
Well, I'm drinking. Oh, thank you so much. I'm drinking. It's called Clairvoyant Clown. Okay,
nice.
Which is I'm not sure where it's from. And of course, being today is the 200th birthday of Ulysses S. Grant. Mayor. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was in the Union Army. I am drinking from my U.S. Grant unconditional surrender mug. That's what my deal is. That being said, what are you drinking?
Well, regarding who U.S. Grant is, no shit, Sherlock. But anyway, wow. I am drinking Ransack the Universe from Collective Arts Brewing out of Hamilton, Ontario. And I am also drinking it out of my Ulysses S. Grant mug. But yes, happy birthday to Ulysses S. Grant, and how appropriate we are recording just kind of our wrap up to the discussion on the Appomattox campaign about the surrender and all that on his 200th birthday.
We are tying a bow on Appomattox, Mary, as they say, right? And we're going to finish this up on his birthday. So so we can kind of jump back a little bit. It's been a few weeks now, so we got to talk about where we left the boys, right?
Yeah.
So when we last saw Generals Grant and Generals Lee, it was on the night of April 8th, 1865. Both were in different mindsets, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Grant having just received Lee's most recent letter, which hinted that he still wanted to fight.
Mm-hmm.
He was struggling. He had a stress-induced migraine. And Robert E. Lee's surrender, he knew was close, but no cigar. See what I did there, Mary? See what I did?
Just like we had no cigars today when we took our picture, but we will be having cigars this weekend.
Mm-hmm. But Lee, realistically, he knew the game was basically over, but he still had more fight in him, and his men still had fight left in them as well. His generals really weren't ready to quit just yet. But again, you got to remember the situation they were in. They had no supplies. These soldiers really hadn't eaten in almost a full week.
Mm-hmm.
They're hungry. They're tired. But they still had that will to fight, sort of, right? So, during the night of April 8th, Lee's going to gather his officers around the campfire in the woods near Appomattox.
Do you think they sang Kumbaya?
They probably did. Probably Home Sweet Home by Metallica. I mean, Motley Crue. Same thing. But from that campsite, the rebel commanders, they could see all the Union campfires dotted all around them. And they could see that, they were basically surrounded, right? Lee was surrounded, and he knew that he probably had a 6-to-1 manpower disadvantage. And he knew there was no supplies. He had no reinforcements coming. His men were starving. Besides that, everything sounds great. Everything was a good time.
It's wonderful.
Camping in the woods nothing better than camping in the woods with the boys, Mary.
Well, that didn't help that when they went for that one supply train, right?
Oh, well,
where it was like it was supposed to be all food, and somebody fucked up administrative error, and they probably got a promotion over that one because that's what happens.
I'm sure they did. But Lee still has he has one more trick up his sleeve.
Yep.
He's still thinking. Well, the big plan of the Appomattox campaign was to get out of Virginia, get into North Carolina, meet up with Joseph E. Johnson's army, and try to have one last shot at this, right? And the odds were against him, but he still wanted to try to break out.
Yep.
He just didn't know what the situation was, but one last try. So he's going to decide, sit around that campfire. They're going to decide they're going to give the reins to John Brown Gordon. Okay, your
Yes.
guy, that hard fighting Georgian, right? And he'd been fighting for the Confederacy since day one. He was at First Bull Run,
Hmm.
and now he's commanding Lee's 9,000 man Second Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia.
He's probably one of
And
the best that Lee has right now. And keep in mind
he
that
is,
Gordon is not West Point trained. He's, I think,
he
originally a
is,
lawyer.
he's also the one closest to the Union line.
Yeah.
So who knows if that's why? But regardless, Gordon seemingly had been in every major battle in the East, and although his body was kind of taking a beating and falling apart, he was still that fire-eating, fire-breathing bastard. He still wanted to keep fighting, right?
Hmm.
So, early on April 9th, okay, this is Sunday. It was Palm
Yep.
Sunday, actually, Mary. And
Yes.
these soldiers, they weren't missing on that. They all knew what it was, right? Gordon and his men are going to try that pre-dawn attack to break Grant's line, hoping that he's going to allow a portion of Lee's army to continue their escape in the hopes of meeting up with Joseph E. Johnson, like I said, North Carolina.
Yeah, and it was, the night before, like Gordon is there and he kind of knows that the jig is up, but Lee has asked him to do this. Like Gordon described the night before as we knew by our own aching hearts that his was breaking, meaning Lee. Yet he commanded himself and stood calmly facing and discussing the long dreaded inevitable. But still, Lee's like, you know what, we're going to do it. So the morning of April 9th at dawn, again, the hope is to link up with General Johnson. So Gordon sent a staff officer to ask Lee if he had any specific directions for him. And Lee responded, yes, tell General Gordon that I should be glad for him to halt just beyond the Tennessee line, which is about 200 miles away. So it's
Yeah.
like they're throwing a little bit of humor in there. But the Confederates are going to be getting their movement, and Gordon is going to attack units of Sheridan's cavalry. And, Fitzhugh Lee is there, and Gordon describes him in his. I mean, Gordon's memoirs are. He can write, but it's still very lost causey. He said the dashing cavalry leader Fitzhugh Lee swept around the Union left flank, which the infantry and artillery attacked the infantry and artillery attacked the front, and he's going to force back the Union line under General Charles Smith.
Mhm.
And you have to keep in mind that this is a charge with men who have not eaten it, and as you said, over a
Right.
week. And Gordon says this last charge was made by footsore and starving men of my command with spirit worthy of the best days of Lee's army. So these are men who are still willing to fight. But the
It's
problem
true.
is it's like the spirit is willing, but your physical body is not going to you're not going to allow it. Now the one thing that Gordon's men do manage to do, they manage to get two pieces of artillery out of
Well,
this.
right, but let's just to set up what he has though. Okay,
Yeah.
he's got 9,000 guys, so he's
Hmm.
not talking about a small group
No.
here. Okay, they're going to be positioned on a place called Tibbs Lane. Okay,
Yep.
and they're going to be supported by cavalry under Fitz Lee, like you said,
Yep.
as well as Armistead Long's artillery. So he's got a pretty good group
Yep.
now. And you mentioned before, across that field is a guy named Colonel Charles Smith. Now, he's a hard fighting New Englander from Hollis, Maine, okay,
Hmm.
under George Crook's 2nd Cavalry Division. So they're going to have that 1st Cavalry wave. Now, Smith's guys were set up across an intersection of the Richmond Lynchburg State Road and the Oakville Road. He's got about 1,200 horsemen and 2 cannon that you mentioned under Lieutenant James Lord, okay? So there's a good group here going at it. So
Yep.
when daybreak hits on the 9th, Gordon's men are going to advance, led by a guy named General Brian Grimes' division. Okay, so one of the men in the 1st North Carolina Sharpshooters described this advance. And again, they're hungry, they're starving,
Yep.
but they're still patriotic. And this is what he writes. He writes, "I never saw a charge so magnificently executed as this. Our men advanced as regularly as though on parade as the shells and grape plowed through the ranks. The files closed up without faltering. The men broke into double quick, and with that old time yell and an irresistible rush, they carried the enemy's position." Okay. This doesn't sound like a bunch of guys who, like you on a Monday morning, at half assed at work, Mary. These are guys who really
Booker.
still have that piss and vinegar. Well, it's true, though. It's true. I don't want to go to work today. Okay. But
Jesus.
Gordon, but to your point, Gordon's men are going to drive Smith's cavalry back, and they're going to capture those 2 guns you just mentioned, and they're going to clear the roads of the Federals. Okay, now they will continue their advance up to the crest of a hill, and when they got there, All they saw was blue.
Oh, it was bad. Like they get up there and like
Yeah.
Gordon's discovered a heavy column of Union infantry coming from the right, and upon his Savannah, basically he is gonna get Savannah'd hard. And he's like, nope. And this is like Ord is there commanding troops. And this is like this is
Edward
a fuck
Ord's yeah.
this. Like Gordon's
So
gonna pull out his fuck this card.
he's got Edward Ord's Army of the James, led by your
Yep.
friend John Gibbon, okay,
Yep.
and as well as two corps from the Army of the Potomac. This is going to be the 24th and the 5th. And coming up, as you so appropriately mentioned, the Savannah, Mary,
Yep.
is that second corps under Andrew Humphreys, okay? Now, a soldier in Gordon's infantry, okay, he surmised the situation, okay, and he writes, Lee couldn't go forward, he couldn't go backwards, and he couldn't go sideways. So basically, Lee was completely surrounded, and 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 any hope of escape vanished faster than a Labatt's blue can in the
Oh,
refrigerator.
Jesus.
Okay,
Well, I
but
was going to
that
say it's funny too that Gordon is getting something up the Savannah, considering that's exactly what he did to Barlow at Gettysburg.
you got some weird thing going with that Savannah all of a sudden. Man, that's new.
Ew.
Okay. Anyway, but all right. Well, so Gordon is forced to withdraw across that Appomattox River to the northeast. Fitz Lee is going to be able to escape with two of his divisions that we
Yep.
talked about under General Thomas Rosser and Thomas Munford. Right. So some of these cavalry is going to get away now. General Grimes, I mentioned, he's going to say afterwards, and I've got quotes, Mary, this time. Fair warning. A Union infantry captain was captured and brought before me and gave me the information that General Ord, with his 10,000 man cavalry, was in our front. So this was the first time, really, where Gordon realized what he was up against. Men under Captain Wilkins Jenkins, North Carolina, they're going to stay behind to kind of protect the retreat a little bit, kind
Yep.
of like Tilden does at Gettysburg a
Yep.
little bit. And they're going to eventually all get captured. And eventually, Gordon's going to see the writing on the wall. And he's going to, as soon as he gets a minute to catch his breath after he crosses the river, he's going to send Lee that doomsday message that he must have dreaded writing and Lee absolutely dreaded getting.
Yep.
And you know what that message said?
Yep. And he said, tell General Lee that command has been fought to a frazzle. And unless Longstreet can unite the movement or prevent these forces from coming upon my rear, I cannot long to go forward. And the problem is Longstreet, there's no way, because while this is all happening to Gordon, Longstreet is getting, starting to get pounded by other portions of the Federal Army, mainly the Second Corps, and he's not going to be able to support Gordon.
It's just the numbers tell the story. And like you said before, these guys are hungry, they're tired. Lee, even before this, Lee was done, and now he knows it. He knows the only thing left to do is to determine his next step, right? And that next step is going to have a generational lasting effect on the future of this country. This
Yep.
country, not your country, this country, United States of America, man. Okay. That's how important whatever decision he made, he knew was going to be important. He knew Granted had hinted at surrender terms, but does he pursue it? I mean, does he try one more last murderous assault to try to break through, knowing he has 6-1 odds against him? Does he? Does he? He'll
The
take. He has. These are the
suspense.
decisions. But if this is a decision he has to make, though, right? Lee is going to call Longstreet over to his discussion. Now, this is not a war council. This is a shoot the shit water cooler talk.
Yep.
And he just wants to find out. William Mahone is there as well as E.P. Alexander. They're also going to be invited. And what they're going to do is they're just going to sit around and discuss options, right? And the concept of surrendering is going to come up pretty quick. And
Mm-hmm.
they all listened, and it would be E.P. Alexander, that Georgian who's been with James Longstreet's artillery chief forever, it seems, through many of these battles.
Likes to throw the balls
He,
around.
he does. And
Ooh.
he's going to beg Lee not to give up. And he's going to say to Lee, and this is reportedly, this is all according to different people who are allegedly there, Alexander's going to allegedly say to Lee, you don't care for military glory or fame, but we are proud of your name and the record of this army. We want to leave it to our children. A little more blood, more or less now, will not make a difference. Okay? What Alexander is suggesting is what Jefferson Davis wants him to do, and what Grant and Lincoln feared the most. What he wants to do is he wants Lee to split up his army, try to escape, and get into the mountains and fight that guerrilla war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alexander's thinking maybe 2/3 of the army can get out. I don't know how the hell he's thinking this, but he's thinking if we can get 2/3 out, he says, we would be like rabbits or partridges in the bushes, and they could not scatter to follow us, right? Now, if they did this, this is the long-term ramifications of this. If they did this, Alexander realized that this would lead to an endless pursuit by the Federals, and the Union would have to eventually have to continue the draft
Yep.
conscription. That would have to continue again. The support for the war would continually go south and the north,
Hmm.
and it would dry up. Now, remember too, there's still 175,000 Rebs across the South still fighting.
Yep.
So it's not like they were down to 14 guys here, right? So Lee is going to sit there. He's going to listen. He's going to ponder this whole thing, and he's going to remember a couple of things. He's going to remember one: his father fought in the Revolutionary War, and they had these tactics, right? And he's going to consider the pluses and the minuses of this. The country also saw this type of guerrilla war in the Civil War. Actually, before the Civil War, with John Brown in Kansas, right?
Exactly. Yep.
The Rebs have been doing it with Nathan Bedford Forrest, Stan Wadey, the Cherokees, the Arkansas River Valley. So this has been a thing. Not to mention John Mosby married, which reminds me of my favorite Civil War story is when he captures John Stoughton in that tent. And he's sleeping in the tent, and he comes in there, and he walks in, and Mosby says, "General, have you heard of John Mosby?" And Stoughton's half asleep, and he says, "Have we caught the rascal?" And he goes, "No, he just caught you." It's
God.
one of my more favorite stories. But this is what's been going on. But
Hmm.
public sentiment in the South early in the war was very much in favor of this. In 1863, the Richmond Times are going to write, "Let the guerrilla system be thoroughly carried out. Let us exact an eye for an eye and a life for a life." That's what they're going to say. It is going to temper off. They're going to look at guerrilla war as distasteful and
Yep.
down the road. But you have to imagine the pressure on Robert E. Lee at this point, right?
Absolutely.
He literally had the weight of his country on his shoulders. And this probably was the most pressure he probably ever felt in any way. And you can't blame him, right?
No.
So what are just put yourself in his shoes for a second. I mean,
Oh, it's not a good. It's. I mean, it's not a good spot to be. I mean, you got a huge decision to make, right? But I mean, most of your commanders are going to be in agreement with you. Like, I mean, you just got word from one of your better commanders, Gordon, saying like he's in like a quote unquote frazzle, which I need to use that phrase more. And
it's a very
like
underutilized phrase in society, right?
frazzle.
Frazzle.
Yeah, frazzle. Frazzled. I didn't realize that
Okay.
Gordon had used that until I.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we can retire that word now. But that's the way it is. But think of the three. Okay, so he's got three choices.
Yep.
Okay, Monty, what are my choices? Behind door number one, he can surrender.
Yep.
Okay. Behind door number two, no, don't forget 6-1 disadvantage. So
Hmm.
that's probably not a good door. Door number two, okay, um, would be the fight, and number three would be that guerrilla warfare, right?
Yep.
So this is the choice that has to be made in real time. It was one of those, let's give it a couple of days because this isn't going to happen. He has to make this decision pretty much on the fly.
Yep.
So in the end, what Lee is going to do is, in my opinion, okay, is going to be the greatest moment of his life.
I would
And this
agree with it.
decision he is
I
going
would
to
agree.
make,
I would agree with you on
right?
that.
Now, he, like any decision, he's not going to take it lightly. He's going to think about it, and he's going to turn to Alexander. And you just imagine him sitting around, just decide what to do. He's going to look at Alexander. He's going to say, "Should I take your suggestion? The men would be without rations and under no control of officers. They would be compelled to rob and steal in order to live. They would become bands of marauders. No, we would bring a state of affairs that would take the country years to recover from." So what does he do? Lee's going to take door number one, and he's going to decide to himself that saving the country for the future is going to have to be done, and he's going to have to present himself to General Grant and surrender his Army of Northern Virginia and accept the consequences of his actions, even if that meant his own personal future. Because don't forget, too, Mary, you know, most revolutionaries, you think back to, Charles the First at the British Civil War, right?
Yep.
English Civil War. It doesn't usually end well, but
Nope.
but what he does by surrendering and foregoing that temptation to go into the mountains for Alexander, this United States could have turned into a Vietnam-like quagmire.
Hmm.
Now, just take it one step further. Not a lot of people think about when the Civil War started. They were, you using. Look at the weapons they had, right? You sometimes
Exactly.
using flintlocks. By the end of the Civil War, you had Gatling guns,
Yep.
right? And just 50 years later, they're fighting with mustard gas in Europe.
Exactly. And they were
So,
already
so in
starting to, they're already starting to test like
yeah,
machine gun like weapons, as
well,
you just
they had
said,
Gatling
right?
guns.
Yeah.
You had airplanes.
Yeah.
If this thing goes in the mountains and lasts 30, 40, 50 years, which it could have, think of the long-term effect this would have in this
Yep.
country and what a bloodbath it would have been.
Hmm.
Because the technology was catching up very, very quickly. And that's when Lee he realizes all this, and he's gonna sit there with his commanders, and he's gonna famously say, "There's nothing left for me to do but to go see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." But he says it is our duty to live.
Yep.
I think that's maybe the most significant thing ever said in the Civil War is that line right there.
I think so too, because he made a choice, as you said. Like, it could have gone on. It would have been Vietnam style warfare, which would have been terrible for the country. Who knows how it would have turned out with the way technology was going and all that. And he goes to see Grant, and he requests a suspension in fighting in order to learn the terms of surrender from Grant. And a white linen dish towel is what is used as the flag of truce. But I can't imagine Lee's mindset going into that, because he doesn't, we talked about in the previous episode the letters, and how Lee is kind of like, I don't want to surrender, but I want peace. I would like to know your terms. I really like it. And it's because execution, right? Like, as you said, the rebels in most things, like Charles in the British Civil War, they get executed. And considering what just had happened, not that now France was the monarchy, but still, it's like shit. People who lose don't end up very in very good circumstances usually. But
Well, don't forget too, Grant doesn't have the reputation of being a big softy either. This is
no, he
unconditional
doesn't.
surrender
Yeah,
Grant.
this is also
Dare I
in the new.
say, as my mug says, unconditional surrender. Lee's got to be thinking, okay, I am SOL and JWF, right? Shit out of
Yeah.
luck and jolly well, you know what? If I surrender, but he realizes that he has to, in his mind, he has to sacrifice himself, and he has to take that personal execution to save the bigger, greater good, which is the country and his men, right?
Yep.
So like you mentioned, he's going to surrender with an old dirty rag, a big white dirty rag with 3 red stripes coming down it. I don't know where the heck they got this damn thing. Probably from my kitchen. You should see the rags in my kitchen, right?
Oh, I've
So
seen the rags in your kitchen.
you have, yeah. Thanks for I'll just take care of those. Don't you worry about it, okay?
Booker.
But what's funny is they're going to send a messenger through the lines with this dirty rag,
Yeah.
and they're going to run into guess who? General George Custer. Okay, now
Yeah.
Custer, he's Custer. Okay, he's going to decide that he's going to personally go visit James Longstreet and get to the bottom of this whole thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he's going to ride up to Longstreet and he's going to say, in the name of General Sheridan, I demand the unconditional surrender of this army. Said this is what he says to Longstreet. Now Longstreet must have laughed so hard his fake beard from the movie must have fallen off him, because he just laughs and says, these aren't the droids you're looking for. I don't run this army. I don't get to make. But then he says, you know what he says? I don't make decisions for this army. And even if I did, I would never take orders from Sheridan anyways.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Nobody likes Sheridan. We'll talk about that in a little bit with Sheridan.
But so Longstreet is like, whatever. So we're talking about 10 o'clock in the morning now on April 9th. And this is where it's a cool story. Is Lee is going to ride the Union line and present himself and recklessly expose himself, Mary, to these Union troops under a full flag of truce.
Yep.
In full view of the Union Army. Now, Grant, he doesn't show up. He's not there. And it would be a federal courier who was going to meet Lee, and he's going to receive Grant's latest letter we talked about last time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lee's going to whip it out, and he's going to look at the subpoena. But Lee's
Wow.
immediately going to pull out a paper and a pencil, and he's going to jot another note together, okay? See, that's why the children don't listen to this. Anyway, so Lee's going to write one more note. He's going to write, General, I ask a suspension of hostilities pending the adjustment of the terms of surrender of this army in the interview requested in my former communication to you. Basically, he's saying, I want to meet you. Just stop ghosting me, right? That's what he's kind of saying. Now, Lee is just standing there, and he's warned by his aides. He's like, not for nothing, but there's still shooting going on. You might not want to be standing here, So about 11 o'clock in the morning, that ceasefire is going to be agreed upon, and Lee And Lee wrote that third letter to the date to Grant, and he's requesting an interview. And so that's to request surrender terms. So
Yep.
the letter basically says, let's talk surrender. Now, in essence, this letter is the end. It seals the deal
Yep.
because now
It does.
everyone knows what's going to be going on. And allegedly, that migraine that Grant had instantly went away. Okay. That he had for the last 24 hours that he'd been struggling with. Because I think now the pressure of everything going on. Because you got to realize, Grant, he was this close to the end, and he's like, please don't screw this up, because
Yep.
anything could have gone wrong. Now, Lee is the soon to be vanquished prisoner. He's going to go meet him now, and he's thinking he doesn't know what's going to happen, but he's going to look good doing it. It's like when you're going to get fired from the DQ, Mary, you're going to have your best outfit on. I
You have your
guarantee you
best
that.
clean hat on and all that. Yeah.
So he's going to be dressed to the nines. He's going to. It probably took Lee longer to get dressed than you do, and that's saying something. Okay, but
Fucker.
okay, you can look how long you want. But he has his best uniform on. He has a red silk sash. He's
Yep.
gonna have that. He's gonna carry that gilded sword, engraved sword. And he says, "I'm probably gonna be General Grant's prisoner today. I must make my best appearance."
Yep. And he arrives around 1 o'clock at the home of Wilmer McLean, who Wilmer McLean is one of these guys. He was there at the beginning of the Civil War in the first battle, or one of the first battles, and he's there at the very end.
Right, but before we get all the way to McLean's house, though, let's just kind of set this back up a little bit too. That in the North, there was a bloodlust for Robert E. Lee. Many in the North, people here in Boston were chanting "Hang Lee" by Boston. Go Celtics, by the way, not for nothing. But the Northern sentiment, was not turned the other cheek to these guys. So there's that going on as well.
Yep.
Now, Grant does receive Lee's final letter at this point, okay? And reportedly, his face completely brightened. He hands the letter to one of his aides, John Rawlins, we talked about, and asked him to read Lee's letter out loud. The reason why is, according to Rawlins, Grant was so emotional he couldn't talk when he read this, okay? So Grant immediately writes back to Lee. He's going to write him one more note. He's going to write, "General, your note on this date is but the moment of 11:50. Received in consequence of me having passed from the Richmond and Lynchburg Road to Farmville and Lynchburg Road. I am writing this about 4 miles west of Walker's Church and will push forward to the front for the purpose of meeting you. Note is sent to me on this road where you wish to interview, where you want this interview to take place." Now, a couple of things to take out of this letter that's really important that people don't always think about is the symbolism. Lee is going to surrender to Grant. Grant is going to let him dictate where and when. And that's something that is probably the first hint that Lee probably feels that maybe the terms might be okay.
The terms are going to be good.
Okay, because he's thinking, because that never happens. Usually you're going to be in my office now, like when you get in trouble at work, right? Same deal. Be here now. He's like, when do you want to surrender? Where do you want it to be? Just let me know. I'm cool. Just let me do it. So I think this is probably, maybe I'm reading into this too much, but I think that's a first indication for Lee that maybe this is going to be okay.
No, I would agree, because I think if Grant had wanted to be kind of like really aggressive with it, he would have been like, "You're meeting me here at this time and don't be late, blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "Okay, pick a place and we'll meet."
Right. So this will we see Grant now turn from the general to the politician and the negotiator, right? This is you can see him turning now, right? In Grant's memoirs, if you read his memoirs, he admits to being extremely nervous during this entire time. When he was riding to this meeting, Grant is nervously anticipating, this meeting, this first meeting. And what's Lee doing? Lee falls asleep under an apple tree. He's going to fall asleep. Now, you can think, but you know what, though? People are like, well, he's cool, he's calm. He's probably exhausted and he's mentally shot. So he is going to fall asleep under an apple tree. And that tree will be cut up by soldiers later and have souvenirs. There's a whole thing going with that apple tree. But Lee is going to be woken up by a Union officer. And you can only imagine, I'd be a fly on the wall for that one.
Oh,
Excuse
God.
me, General Lee? Can you get up, please? Right? So Lee is going to wake up and he's going to read that letter, and immediately he's going to send an aide to find a suitable location. So he sees the letter. He's like, okay, where and when? He's going to start sending people into Appomattox courthouse to find a place to go. Now, Appomattox is not Manhattan. There's only a couple places, okay?
No.
It's a hot day. It's middle of the day, and they find the village. The village has been barren for most of 1865. There's no one there. The first house they find is a dump. It's not suitable, so they
Mm-hmm.
turn it down. The second house they find is the house owned by what you said, Wilmer McLean.
Yeah.
And again, McLean, that whole story, his house is in Manassas, the first Bull Run, that everybody knows that story. But suffice it to say, this is where it's all going to end. So the location is agreed upon. The time is basically agreed upon about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So both parties now are going to start their treks to this house. And you can just picture this situation because when they get there around 1 o'clock on the 9th, there's no pomp and circumstance, there's no
No.
ceremony. The Confederate entourage is going to arrive first. The first guy who's going to walk in the door is Charles Marshall, one of Lee's aides. He's going to enter that house. Lee will follow and wearing his crisp uniform, and he's going to sit at the table. He's going to wait for Grant. Now he's probably checking his Facebook update, checking Appomattox Courthouse FML, one of those deals, right?
God.
So
General Grant likes this. All the Union armies. Phil Sheridan likes this.
He's probably like BRB,
Chamberlain likes this.
Charles Dane is being a dick, BRB, one of those deals.
EP Alexander puts it like angry face.
Probably, exactly. He probably deleted his Facebook. Alexander's probably like, worst day ever. Don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, he vague books and everybody's like, what's going on?
Judah Benjamin's like, what's wrong?
Okay. He gets Nathan Bedford Forrest. What's going on up there?
Well, anyway, so about 1:30, about a half an hour later, Grant is going to start to approach the McLean house. So unlike Lee, Grant's wearing a muddy uniform. He's wearing a private shirt.
Yeah.
His cheeks are all red and puffy, kind of like you are in the morning. And he's
that's how you look after a migraine.
Okay, but he's a complete contrast, 180 from Lee. There's stories about there was sharpshooters and maybe there's a million reasons why they said he was dressed that way, but who the hell knows? But what's interesting is it's like walking in and. The history was huge, but there was no big circumstance. There was no band. There was no big deal. There was no, protocol. Like nowadays, you knew these foreign countries, they meet. They talk about the size of the table, who sits where. They just kind of walked in and sat down. So
they're
going to sit down. They're going to sit at a table. They're going to sit 8 feet apart on this wooden table, right? Mm-hmm. And Grant's going to walk in. And Lee's going to stand, and they're going to shake hands, and they're going to be properly socially distanced, married, about 8 feet apart. So even back then, who knows, right? But Grant's going to say in his memoirs, and this is interesting when you read his memoirs talking about this, because I think he's being really honest. He's talking about Lee now, and he says, as he was a man of such dignity with an impassible face, his feelings were entirely concealed from my observation. Basically, he's going to surrender. In his entire future's unknown. He looks like the guy that Jiffy Lube waiting for his car to get done. He's just sitting there. Whatever. Okay. That's how.
He was not. I mean, that's how Lyman, one of Meade's staff, will describe him after the surrender. It's like it's tough to know the emotion behind his face. But I mean, and then you have Gordon saying that they could tell that there was a lot going on within Lee, but you couldn't read it on his face. And keep in mind too, like this is the first time that Grant and Lee have been face to face like this close in 2 decades.
18 years.
Yeah.
That's how long it's been. 18.
Yeah.
So, and they talk and, Grant starts being nervous. He starts, rambling on and on about their experiences in the Mexican War. He talks about he met Lee back when, and Lee admittedly says, he remembers that meeting, but couldn't picture his face. And he's been trying to figure out what he's been looking like for a while. So eventually, Lee is going to stop this trip down memory lane, talk about Mexico and all the stuff they did. Talking about, Hancock and Heath, all this stuff, shenanigans going on down there. They were just talking about this now. And that pillow talk thing ends. That whole thing. And it's going to be Lee who's actually going to begin the conversation. Now, again, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this in just our own words, okay?
Yep.
And we'll specifically talk, just not read exactly what they said, but just kind of how this thing would have went. Okay, so Lee is sick of hearing about all this stuff. He wants to get the shit going, and this is what he's going to basically say.
Okay, Sam. I think we know why we're both here and we need to get to it. I asked to see you to know what terms that I have to surrender my army of Northern Virginia to you.
Yeah. Okay. And Grant's going to look at him. He's going to say, well, it's like the terms we basically talked about. My letters I've been previously saying. I mean, basically, your officers, your men, they're going to surrender. They're going to be paroled, and they can't fight anymore. Okay, until they're properly exchanged. And we're going to all your arms, all your ammo, all your supplies. We're going to take as government property. So that's pretty much what we're thinking here over here in the Union, Bobby.
Okay. We're cool with that.
Okay. And then Grant's like, well, I think our conversation we talked about is pretty clear. And that we're going to talk about here. And what we really want to do is we were hoping that this thing here just ends to a complete end of this fighting. Okay, there's been way too much loss of life already. Why don't we just be cool, settle this right now, and just end this shit?
And Lee says, well, I think, Sam, that we have both carefully considered the proper steps to be taken. And I need to really strongly suggest you commit to writing the terms you have proposed so that we can act upon them.
Grant's like, okay, fine. Just give me a goddamn pencil, Rollins. Oh, here's what's cool about this, Mary, is at this very moment, this is when Grant's gonna light up. Okay. Now here's something that's gonna surprise you, Fincheru. What does he light up?
A cigar.
No, he lights a pipe. A pipe. And every historical movie and thing has this wrong. Instead of a cigar, Grant lights a pipe. And I learned that. It broke my heart, admittedly. So he's going to basically fire up this pipe and begin to write out this note. And when he's done, and here's another thing, another good symbolic thing he does. When he's finishing writing this big long note out, he doesn't hand it to an aide. He gets up and walks over personally to hand it over to Lee. And Lee is going to uncomfortably sit there. He's going to read the note. He's going to fidget. He's going to play with his glasses. He's going to cross and uncross his legs. He's either reading or has to go to the bathroom, one or the other, right? But he's going to take a lot of time. And I'm going to read this note, what it says, okay? Just what it literally says, okay? It says, gentlemen, in accordance with the substance of my letter to you on the 8th instant, most recent 8th, I propose to receive the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia on the following terms, okay? Rolls of the officers and men to be made in duplicate, one copy to be given to an officer designated by me, the other to be retained by such an officer or officers as you may designate. The officers to give up their individual paroles, not to take up arms against the government of the United States until properly. And that's when this kind of goes off the rails a little bit.
Yeah. Lee continues reading.
He does. He's going to read it and he's going to say, after the words until properly, the word exchanged seems to be omitted. He says, you doubtlessly intended to use this word. I presume it has been omitted inadvertently. With your permission, I will mark it where it should be here. And Grant goes, okay, yeah, okay, I found that. Okay, go right ahead. So the letter is going to continue, properly exchanged now, and each company or regimental commander to sign a like parole for the men of their commands. The arms, artillery, and public property to be parked and stacked and returned over to the officer appointed by me to receive them. This will not embrace the side arms of the officers nor their private horses or baggage. This done, each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not to be disturbed by the United States authority so long as they observe the parole and the laws in force of which they reside. U.S. Grant and the horse you rode in on, okay? That's what he basically says. So he's basically saying officers can keep their sidearms, they can keep their animals, okay? All your weapons are going to be stacked up, and that's going to be it, okay?
Yeah. And Lee responds with, my army is going to be very happy about this. I don't know if you understand how it is in the South, but my men, we own all our horses in the army. And its organization in this respect differs from the United States. If one of my men ever lost one of their horses, they would have to buy their own horse. Other than that, they would be, basically forced to go into the infantry. So if they can keep their horses, that would be amazing. I should understand whether these men will be permitted to retain their horses.
So before I get to what Grant would have said, is you notice Lee's mood change here, right? He
Yep.
goes from being nervous to how suddenly he realized, okay, I got this. Now I can start dictating terms a little bit now.
Yep.
I'm not going to get hanged. We're not going to have public hangs. I'm not going to be marched down Pennsylvania Avenue with my men, be humiliated. This is going to be okay. So Grant, he hears that he wants to keep his horses. And Grant's going to say, well, you'll find the terms as written. I ain't allowing it, okay? The officers are permitted to take their private property, but that's it. Okay, now Lee is going to sigh here.
Yeah, he's gonna be like, this is going to have an amazing effect upon my men. It will be gratifying and will do much toward conciliation of our people.
But before he says that, Grant's going to tell him what he's going to do, though.
Right.
Okay, Grant's going to basically say, he's going to say, look, I don't know how your army works. Okay, I don't understand how your officers, I mean, your men have their own horses. I was not aware of that. I'm not going to change the terms here. Okay, I'm not going to do it. But I'll tell you what I am going to do is when they turn in their stuff, if they say they have their animals, they can I'll just freaking take them. Who cares? Okay, take them back to their little farms, he says, right? And that's when Lee says this is going to have the great effect. And now you can kind of see the mood lightening up a little bit, right? Grant knows Lee's done. Lee knows he's going to get good terms. And now it seems like everything's going to be pretty good, right? Now, Eli Parker, one of Grant's aides, is going to receive the surrender document from Lee.
Yep.
Okay.
And he's a Native American.
I mean, from Grant's, he is.
Yep.
And Marshall is going to get a piece of paper for Lee's response because Lee's going to write a formal response to this now. And what Lee's response is going to say is this. We're just going to write down, General, I have received your letter on this date containing the terms of surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia as proposed to you, as they are substantially the same as expressed in your letter of the 8th instant. They are accepted. I will proceed to designate the proper officers to carry out the stipulations into effect. So now it's basically over. And then Lee is going to say, not for nothing, but here's the deal. My guys are starving. Okay. They're eating tree bark. They're eating grass. Okay. Can you help me out? Can you help a brother out?
Mm-hmm.
And so Grant's going to agree to some 25,000 rations. They're going to go back and forth. Is 25,000 going to be enough? Yeah, it will be. How about some DQ gift cards? Throw those into. Oh, that'd be great. It's hot. They love ice cream.
Like blizzards.
And so they're going to agree to send food. Now, we mentioned Eli Parker. It's one of those stories that sounds too good to be true. Eli Parker is what? He's a Seneca Indian, right?
Yep.
What's going to happen is Grant is going to introduce Lee to all of the people in the room. Oh, this is my friend Bobby. We go back to Mexico.
Yeah.
They're going to meet him, and Lee is going to reportedly have said, I am glad to see one real American here. Okay. And Parker is going to say what?
We're all Americans here, sir.
Yeah, that's what he says. And that sounds, who knows if that's true or not. It sounds pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, though, that Parker is a character in the movie Lincoln. You see him walking with Grant from the River Queen. And that's really cool. And, you also see the scene of surrender.
So as you can imagine, people are realizing what's going on in the house. Okay. So a crowd's going to start to gather outside. I mean, just imagine it's a car crash and traffic slows down. Everyone's going to look and see what's going on. There's a big crowd gathered outside of it. And Lee is going to emerge from the house and he's going to punch his left hand to his right 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. Okay. And he'll be saluted by Grant and his staff, to which Lee is going to return the salute. And they're all going to raise their hats to each other, right?
Yep.
Now, Grant in his memoirs, he talks about this, and you have to look for this, but he says, what's Grant thinking? Because he went from this migraine to stress and nervous. And I was expecting him to sit there and say, Yahoo, right? But he wasn't. And in his memoirs, he writes, I felt sad and depressed at the downfall of a foe who had fought so long and valiantly and had suffered so much for a cause, though the cause was, I believe, one of the worst for which any people ever fought. Okay. So it's melancholy. It's over. He's happy it's over. But I think he respected Robert E. Lee. I mean, how could you not?
Oh, I think he did. I think the two men respected each other quite a bit.
And to see this vanquished guy leave with this proverbial tail between his legs must have been hard, right? West Point guy, Mexico, all this stuff. Now, cheers are going to start. The word's going to spread, and they're going to go. And his old George Gordon Meade is going to be there, and he's going to start leading the cheers. It's all over, boys.
It's all over. It's all over.
You can picture all doing cartwheels.
And you can't imagine the snapping turtle that that
Well, yeah,
enthusiastic.
probably was, right? But the men are hugging, they're celebrating. And this actually pissed off Grant. He didn't like that one bit.
Hmm.
So it was a boot 4:30 at this point. And he tells them all shit. And Grant is actually going to message Stanton and
Yeah.
let him know what's going on. And this is interesting. If you read his response to Stanton, he writes, General Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia this afternoon on terms proposed by myself. Now, what's interesting about that was this tells you a little bit about the psychology between him and Stanton,
Yeah.
because Grant knows this was not determined by himself, because this goes back to the River Queen
Yeah.
with Gideon Wells and Sheridan and all those
Yeah. Well, the
Sherman on there.
River Queen was Sherman, Lincoln, Grant, and David Dixon
Gideon
Porter.
Wells. Oh well, yeah, Porter, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he's writing this letter by terms by me, right? So it kind of shows a little bit. Was it a shot at Stanton from him? Who knows what it was? But regardless, he's going to message him to let him know that the Army of Northern Virginia is over.
Yep.
Lee is going to start riding back. He's taking a slow walk of shame back, okay? And he's going to go back. It's about a 15-minute horse ride back, just not far away.
Yep.
Along the way, many of his men are hooping and hollering like the movie Gettysburg. They're all cheering him. And they're hearing rumors of surrender, and they're all yelling up to him, going, "Sir, we surrendered, sir." You know, they're we, you know, and according to a lot of accounts, Lee had tears in his eyes, and he just raised his hat as his men passed by.
Yeah.
And allegedly, all the cheers turned into sobbing, and men were sad. Um, Many of the men were pissed; they didn't want to stop fighting, right? Dude, we're gonna keep fighting. We're not gonna stop. Don't make us stop. And I guess Lee was,
Lee was
there's
like,
no
fuck
time
that.
for that. He's like, we're not doing it. We're not. So then April 9th ends. April 10th now, Lee is going to get up and he's going to write that General Order Number 9. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's going to be sent to his men. General Order Number 9 in the South will end up being like the Gettysburg addresses in the North for a while.
Yep.
Because it's going to be a big moment. And I'll read it to you. Okay. After 4 years of arduous service marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. I need not tell you the brave survivors of so many hard fought battles who have remained steadfast to the last, that I have consented to this result from no distrust of them, but feeling that valor and devotion would accomplish nothing that would compensate for the loss that must be attended to the continuance of the contest, I determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those whose past services have endeared them to our countrymen. By terms of the agreement, and this is going to tell them the deal now, officers and men can return to their homes and remain exchanged. You will take with you the satisfaction that proceeds from the consciousness of duty faithfully performed. I earnestly pray that the merciful God will extend to you his blessing and protection with increased admiration of your constancy and devotion to your country and a grateful remembrance of your kind and generous considerations for myself. I bid you an affectionate farewell. And that's how he says goodbye to his guys.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, Lee's going to leave later that day, because one thing Grant basically says is you don't got to stick around and watch him turn the guns in. That's humiliating. Yeah. Just go home. But at this point, a lot of the Union officers want to go meet Robert E. Lee. He's a rock star, and he's not meeting anybody. He's not seeing anybody. One guy shows up. Okay, again, on the 10th, this is George Gordon Meade. Yep. He shows up and he rides over to meet old, Robert E. Lee, his old Gettysburg adversary, right? And Lee actually agrees to meet with him. And so Lee's going to ride up to go meet him. They're going to meet somewhere between. That's what it sounds like. They have not seen each other for 18 years, okay? And Lee's going to approach on his horse, and Meade's going to remove his hat. And Lee didn't recognize Meade at first. It's been a while, because even turtles age, apparently. He didn't recognize what he looked like, right? But Lee says to Meade, "What are you doing with all that gray in your beard?" And Meade's going to respond back to him, "Well, you'll have to answer for most of that, General Lee." And that allegedly got a smile out of Lee. And they said it was the only time he smiled the entire campaign.
Yeah.
So he gets that little joke about it. So Lee's going to take off. He's going to go. Fast forward to the 12th. At the 11th, the rations are being delivered, and the men are eating, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. Twisters being played, a lot of whittling being done. And this is when we get to the 12th, when the Confederates do stack their arms.
Yeah, but we've got to go back a little bit before we talk about that. We have to go back to the 9th. and talk about what happens to some other people in the Confederate Army. That plays into what happens at the 9th, on the 9th too. And that's Gordon and that's Sheridan and their meeting. John Brown Gordon is the one that is doing a lot of the fighting, and he finally finds out that he has to stop, and he gets word that there is a flag of truce between Lee and Grant. This all happens while the surrender is going on. So it's General Custer, who you mentioned before. He's gone to Longstreet, but then he goes to General Gordon. And Gordon says, the Union officer was slender and graceful and a superb rider. His hair was very long, falling almost to his shoulders. And Custer says, I am General Custer and bear a message to you from General Sheridan. The general desires me to present his compliments and to demand the immediate and unconditional surrender of all troops under your command. And Gordon is basically does what Longstreet does. He's like, fuck you, dude. Not happening. But what happens is Sheridan eventually comes forward, and by now Gordon has gotten word that Lee is surrendering. And Gordon described Rienzi, Sheridan's horse, as a very handsome animal. And that's quite possibly the most positive thing Gordon has to say about his meeting with Sheridan. It's quite evident they don't like each other. And this is what Gordon has to say about it. Truth demands that I say General Sheridan that his style of conversation and general bearing were never discourteous, were far less agreeable and pleasing than those of any other officer of the Union Army whom it was my fortune to meet. I do not recall a word he said which I could regard as in any degree offensive, but there was an absence of delicacy and consideration which was exhibited by other Union officers. So basically, this guy's an asshole, and I don't like him. And that's because of what's he mentions what happened in the valley and all that. And so this is what Sheridan says to Gordon. We have met before, I believe, at Winchester and Cedar Creek in the valley. I had the pleasure of receiving some artillery from your government consigned to me through your commander, General Early. Sheridan, and that's what Sheridan says to Gordon. So then Gordon realizes at this point that Sheridan has no clue that he has secured, even though it's just 2 pieces of artillery, Gordon's got to get the last word in. And he says, that's true. And I have this morning received from your government artillery consigned to me through General Sheridan. So thanks for that. And he probably throws his sunglasses on like you did earlier. It's quite clear that the two of them don't like each other. But then that leads us into where we are now with this, where the stacking of the arms happens. And John Brown Gordon is to be a part of this stacking of the arms.
Mm-hmm. They will, and what's going to happen is, there are 25,000 Confederates, and they're going to be marching down that lane to a village on the Richmond-Lynchburg State Road. Say that 3 times. And the man placed in charge of the stacking for the Union is, guess who, Mary?
Chamberlain.
Joshua, Colonel Dick Stash.
Dick Stash. Yeah, Colonel Dick Stash. Yep.
So Chamberlain is going to be put in charge of the surrender of this. And he at that point Chamberlain had been through a lot. I mean, he'd been brevet, he's a general now.
Yep.
So he was someone who was going to be in charge of that. He was one who allegedly had told Gordon that he was, he found out before anyone that they were going to be surrendering, which is probably not true.
I read something tonight that was bullshit, but just so everybody knows that Gordon does refer to Chamberlain as one of the knightliest soldiers of the Federal Army.
Right. I'm sure you can talk this other way, but what Chamberlain does, he makes sure, though, that road is lined with Union soldiers. Okay, mm-hmm. They're going to do this very pomp and circumstance, unlike the original surrender. So, both Union men are going to stand in silence and honor the Confederates as they march by. Chamberlain wrote about it because, of course, he did. Okay, and what he does, he writes, "The dusty swarms forged forward into great columns of march. On came the old swinging root step and swaying battle flags. On our part, not a sound of trumpet nor roll of drums, but an odd stillness rather and breathtaking, as if it were the passing of the dead." Say what you will about Chamberlain, dude can write, okay?
Oh, he can.
So just imagine this moment where this solemn ceremony, these Confederates walking down this road, this Richmond-Lynchburg stage road, and the Union men basically saluting them and honoring them, right? Shoulder arms, the whole deal. And Lee, I mentioned before, Lee is going to head out. He's going to get back to 707 East Franklin Street. Richmond is his home. And on April 20th, is when he's going to write a long letter. I'm not going to read this one because it goes on and on and on. He's going to write a long letter from his home in Richmond to Jefferson Davis explaining, why he surrendered, the condition of his army, all this stuff. Okay, he's going to explain it. And what's funny is he's back in Richmond from this point on. Um, there's this parade of visitors. Many of his
Hmm.
ex-soldiers coming to visit him. A lot of people coming to see him. And the house is still there, Mary. If you want to go call on General Lee, I don't know if he's going to answer you, but he can go to his house and you can go see it. But on May 5th, 1865, okay, guess who knocks on his door?
Grant.
George Gordon Meade
Oh,
again.
Meade. Yeah.
He's a neighbor who won't go away. He just keeps coming, okay? And the purpose of Meade's visit is to convince Lee, believe it or not, to sign the amnesty oath to the United States. So he's like, maybe you should sign this damn thing. It's going to go a long way to reconciliation. Don't forget, by now, Lincoln's dead,
Hmm.
right? So according to Meade, Lee said he wanted to see how it was all going to play out first. He was curious to see how the new administration was going to treat the South before he signs this damn thing because no one really knows. Andrew Johnson, what's going to happen. What's interesting too is Lee also, um, they talked to Meade. He was concerned about the country's attitude towards the Negro.
Hmm.
And Meade had no answer for that. He goes, I have no idea how it's going to go
Yeah.
because I don't know. And that's really going to be the end of it for Lee. And Lee's going to go on to do his whole thing going forward. But at the end of the day, he's going to gracefully exit the stage, and he could have done a lot of different things. We talked about this before. He could have fought. He could have sacrificed his men. If he chose to fight, okay, it would have been Cold Harbor again. It would have been a
Yeah.
bloodbath in reverse. Okay, it would have been the worst thing in the world. There would have been so many people killed. If he chose to fight in the mountains, it would have gone on and on and on. So he took the honorable thing. And sometimes you got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him. And he
Hmm.
did exactly what he was going to do. And you can say whatever you want about Robert E. Lee, and I've heard it all before, okay? But you cannot deny what he did was one of the greatest moments of his life. And it's still being affected today and still being felt today because he chose wisely. He did not choose poorly, like in
Yes.
the Indiana Jones movie, which he could have, and his bosses told him to. Some of his own generals did,
Yep.
but he had to be that. He had to be what he was, that graceful guy, knowing when it was time. When it was time. Sometimes you just know, and he knew that was his time.
Yep. He did. I would agree with that. And his men had to put, his generals, Longstreet, Gordon, had to put their faith in that. And I think because they didn't protest against it. I mean, EP does, but you know, Gordon goes and does his thing on the 9th, and then finally he's just like, you know what, I'm done. And I think Gordon, if you read his memoirs, he knew that Lee was done, and Gordon's final speech to his men is one that, like, he said, I closed with a prophecy that passion would speedily die and that the brave and magnanimous soldiers of the Union Army, when disbanded and scattered among the people, would become promoters of sectional peace and fraternity. Um, and he does say that the prophecy would have been speedily fulfilled but for the calamitous fate that befell the country in the death of President Lincoln. So there is that plays into it too. But I think, they put their faith in Lee, a man like Gordon, who was like God, that guy dies wrapped in the Confederate flag, right? Very lost cause. Longstreet and him put their faith in what their commander's doing, and I think that's why it's Lee's greatest moment. But I think on the other side of it, in the Union side, this is one of Grant's greatest moments in the Civil War too, because I mean, we know the terms that were laid out in the River Queen, but he still could have been like, you know what?
Mhm.
I'm not going to give you your horses. I'm not going to let your men take their property, even though that's the way
No,
it is there. He could have done that.
he went from a patent clerk to a soldier
Yeah,
to a general. And on the April 9th, he turned to a politician,
exactly.
right? And
Yeah.
and so he's going to use that, and he's going to parlay that into eventually getting into the White House because he was somebody who could transcend what he probably thought he was, right? They said he was good at war and marriage, the only two things he was ever good at. That's what people said at the beginning, back in Galena, right?
Yep.
But he ended up being somebody who we talked a lot about how all these people evolve and the weapons evolved. Grant evolved
Mm-hmm.
all the way through. And
Absolutely.
he's somebody who went above and beyond whatever the River Queen stuff was. He still had to do it. And you're right. He could have said, nope, forget it, turn in your horses. But
Yep.
he did it in a way where he allowed the Confederates to leave with their heads held high. He let all the officers of the Confederates leave. There was going to be no executions. There was going to be no embarrassing, no trials. They were just going to go home and call it a day and begin that reconciliation, which unfortunately is going to be halted because of John Wilkes Booth. But if you look at how that was going to go, they were in the best position to reconcile, right?
Yep.
And that's how it was. And then, and because that was not allowed to heal correctly, we're still feeling it today. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
that's where Booth robbed us. Unfortunately, was he stole the ability to completely let that broken bone completely heal.
Yep.
Now it's still broken, but it's trying to heal, but it's just not going to heal correctly. So
Yep.
So at the end of the day, Robert E. Lee is gonna step away, and he's going to end up gaining a lot of respect by a lot of different people because of what he didn't do. And sometimes you can gain a lot by not doing something just as well as doing something. So I think that's a good place to drop it here.
I agree.
think that's a good way to end it. And and that's going to be how it's all going to play itself out. So what is coming up for us next, Mary?
So next, we will not be doing a Facebook Live this weekend because we are going to be in Baltimore and doing some stuff with our friend Lisa Samia, the most amazing living poet of the Civil War. And I'm sure we'll talk about that next week. But our next episode we are going to be having Peter from the Seminary Ridge Museum come on and talk to us. And he is the director. Yeah. We're going to be talking a bit about the seminary during the Battle of Gettysburg, as well as the history of the Seminary Ridge Museum and how it became a museum. So that's pretty awesome that he's doing that with us. And then we will be talking Yellow Tavern, and then we will be talking Seven Pines.
Wow, we're gonna go from Jeb Stuart. I don't think he's gonna like this one, Mary.
Hey, there's a Canadian in Jeb Stewart.
I know. And then we're gonna be talking about seven, but we'll be talking Oliver Otis Howard. Oh, good Lord. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming down the road. All right, so that's a good place to drop it here. Yeah. So again, thanks everybody for listening to us. I think we did justice to Appomattox. I think it was a 2 full episodes is a good way to describe how they got there, how it all went, and just understanding that psychology of all the players involved. Mm-hmm. Watching Robert E. Lee ride off, not knowing if they were ever going to see him again. What's going to happen to me? I'm James Longstreet. Am I going to be hanged? And it all ends up being this different situation. And I think for a lot of people, guys like Mosby, guys like Longstreet, I think they were able to grow and become a bigger part of the American U.S. government, perhaps because of some of the reconciliation.
Yeah,
you're going to have your Gordons, you're going to have your Earlys, you're going to have the people who are just going to take their ball and go home anyway. But I think a lot of them saw Robert E. Lee's example, right? And I think they tried to live through his example going forward towards that reconciliation. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing that Robert E. Lee did really, really well too, is he helped show his officers what honor and valor were. Yeah. And that's something they took as they went forward too.
Yeah.
So, right.
And I think even somebody like Gordon, who remains a lost cause or to his dying day, but even with the surrender, he knew the jig was up and he respected Lee's decision, and he was like, this is it. And that's what he's telling his men. We have to go home now. There's Funko Mary.
Or wants to go home now too. Oh, okay. So next we're going to be doing Peter Mealy will be here with the Seminary Museum. That'll be a lot of fun talking about that. We'll talk about the history of it. We're going to talk about the museum that's been going on, which we got to go to last weekend, go up to the cupola.
We did.
And that was
awesome.
pretty cool to be
I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Have some fun with that. We'll definitely do. He'll be a good talk, and we got some more battle stuff coming down the road. So, any final words from you, Fincheroo?
Thank you for our listeners for all your support for these last 81 episodes, and especially to you, Darren. You are the best. You are the best podcast co-host could have ever asked for, and you are awesome.
I'm just a diva, Mary. That's what I am.
Oh God, you
just
are not.
Just a diva, an arrogant Massachusetts diva.
No, you're not. Stop it. God.
I take my sunglasses off here.
God, anyway. You're the best. Stop it. Any final words from you?
Nope, I'm good. I am good. So off we go. So again, have a safe weekend, everybody. Hope enjoy the episode. Stay safe. Stay cool. Go Red Sox. Go Celtics, Mary. Go Celtics. The championship's coming. I can feel it. So we can head off to that. So, all right, guys. Thanks for everybody listening. We appreciate it. And we will talk to you all, as they say, on the other side.
See you guys later.
Peace out.